Xin chào quý phụ huynh và các bạn học sinh thân mến. Mình là Mỹ, hôm nay rất vui được đồng hành cùng các bạn trong webinar ghi bàn IELTS Speaking trong 90 phút cùng với lại chuyên gia IELTS IDP là thầy Simon Brown. Rồi, chắc là để bắt đầu chương trình mình sẽ à, tham gia một cái mini game để không khí nó sôi động hơn ha các bạn. Thì luật chơi rất là đơn giản, các bạn chỉ cần nhắn tin vào ô chat box. Bạn nào có đáp án đúng và nhanh nhất thì sẽ nhận được phần quà tặng từ IELTS IDP. Các bạn đã sẵn sàng chưa ạ? Rồi, trò chơi của mình sẽ bắt đầu ngay bây giờ ha các bạn. Rồi, khi tham dự kỳ thi IELTS, thí sinh bắt buộc phải có giấy tờ tùy thân nào? A. Sổ hộ khẩu. B. Bằng lái xe. C. Chứng minh nhân dân hoặc căn cước công dân hoặc hộ chiếu. Và D. Là sổ học bạ. Rồi, mình đã thấy có rất là nhiều câu trả lời ở trong phần chat box rồi. Đáp án của mình sẽ là C ha các bạn. Đáp án đúng của mình sẽ là C nhé. Rồi, đáp án C. Ừm, Có rất là nhiều các bạn thí sinh đang có đáp án đúng ở đây. Mình sẽ chúc mừng bạn có câu trả lời đúng và nhanh nhất là bạn Thanh Thúy Phạm cho câu hỏi đầu tiên của mình ha. Rồi, các bạn sẵn sàng đến với câu hỏi thứ hai nha. Thí sinh có thể tham gia kỳ thi IELTS ở độ tuổi nào? A. Từ 12 tuổi. B. Từ 16 tuổi. C. Từ 18 tuổi. Và D. Thí sinh có thể tham gia kỳ thi IELTS ở bất kỳ độ tuổi nào. Rồi, các bạn nào có câu trả lời chưa ạ? Wow, các bạn nhanh quá. Rồi, mình thấy ở đây có rất là nhiều câu trả lời D, A. Ừm, Các bạn trả lời D, các bạn trả lời là A ha. Câu trả lời đúng của mình sẽ là câu D ha các bạn. Thí sinh có thể tham gia kỳ thi IELTS ở bất kỳ độ tuổi nào nha. Và người có đáp án đúng và nhanh nhất cho câu hỏi thứ hai của chúng ta, đó chính là bạn Thiên Phú Phạm. Chúc mừng bạn. Các bạn đã sẵn sàng đến với lại câu hỏi thứ ba chưa? Mình nhanh tay lên ha. Rồi, bắt đầu. IELTS IDP hiện có bao nhiêu địa điểm thi trên toàn quốc? A. 28, B. 29, C. 30 và D là 31. Rồi, câu hỏi này khó nè. Mình thấy có rất là nhiều câu trả lời khác nhau. A, B, C, D có hết. Rồi, vậy thì đáp án đúng cho câu hỏi này của mình là câu số mấy? Các bạn sẵn sàng chưa ạ? Có bạn nào chưa kịp trả lời không ạ? Rồi, mình sẽ show đáp án cho các bạn ha. Đó chính là 31 địa điểm ha các bạn. Rồi, vậy thì bạn nào sẽ có câu trả lời chính xác và nhanh nhất hiện tại? Các bạn có cảm thấy hồi hộp không ạ? Chúng ta đã có người chiến thắng là bạn Hoàng Anh, đã có câu trả lời chính xác và nhanh nhất cho câu hỏi này ha các bạn. Các bạn chuẩn bị tiếp tục đến với câu hỏi tiếp theo của mình ha. Rồi, thí sinh được đăng ký thi IELTS One Skill Retake trong vòng bao nhiêu ngày kể từ ngày hoàn thành bài thi IELTS trên máy tính? A là 60 ngày, B 50 ngày, C 40 ngày và D là 30 ngày. Rồi, wow, câu trả lời đang được đổ về rất là nhiều. Chúng ta có những đáp án là C, D và A. Là chưa có bạn nào chọn B hết đúng không ạ? Rồi, chúng ta có người chiến thắng cho câu trả lời này rồi ha các bạn. Bạn có câu trả lời nhanh và chính xác nhất là bạn Nguyễn Phương Ngân Đặng ha. Chúc mừng bạn. Thì câu trả lời đúng của chúng ta sẽ là 60 ngày kể từ khi hoàn thành bài thi IELTS trên máy tính thì các bạn có thể đăng ký kỳ thi One Skill Retake rồi ha các bạn. Rồi. Ok, thì đó là 5 câu hỏi cho cái vòng câu hỏi và trả lời để nhận thưởng vừa rồi của IELTS IDP. Thì các bạn được đọc tên sẽ vui lòng là mình gửi tin nhắn đến fanpage IELTS by IDP theo cú pháp là IELTS Workshop tháng 6, họ và tên của các bạn và địa chỉ để được IDP gửi quà ha các bạn. Các bạn lưu ý là mình sẽ nhắn tin đến fanpage nha. Rồi. Vậy bây giờ mình xin phép là được bắt đầu phần giới thiệu về IDP ha các bạn. Rồi, thì như các bạn có thể nhìn thấy trên màn hình, IDP là tổ chức giáo dục hàng đầu thế giới về dịch vụ du học và được chính phủ Úc thành lập vào năm 1969. Hiện IDP đã có mặt tại hơn 32 quốc gia với hơn 153 văn phòng trên toàn cầu ha các bạn. Thì có mặt tại Việt Nam, IDP đồng hành là sở hữu và tổ chức kỳ thi IELTS quốc tế tại Việt Nam, cũng như quản lý trung tâm đào tạo tiếng Anh Access và cổng thông tin Hot Course. Như các bạn thấy thì trên màn hình là các cái văn phòng của IDP tại Việt Nam. Thì IDP hiện tại đang có mặt tại các tỉnh thành như là Hồ Chí Minh, Hà Nội, Đà Nẵng, Hải Phòng, Nha Trang và Vinh. Đây là những cái thành phố có hiện diện văn phòng của IDP. Tuy nhiên là các bạn mà không ở những cái tỉnh thành này cũng có thể yên tâm là liên hệ với IDP rất là dễ dàng. Bởi vì ngoài những văn phòng này thì chúng ta còn có văn phòng trực tuyến tại miền Bắc và văn phòng trực tuyến tại miền Nam ha các bạn. Khi mà các bạn cần hỗ trợ tư vấn hồ sơ du học, hoặc các bạn cần liên hệ với IDP thì các bạn có thể liên hệ qua số hotline là 1900 6955, hoặc là các bạn có thể liên hệ qua website của IDP là idp.com ha. Rồi, thì sau đây mình sẽ đi qua một cái phần giới thiệu cụ thể hơn về kỳ thi IELTS IDP. IDP rất tự hào là đồng sở hữu chứng chỉ IELTS và đồng hành cùng với lại các thí sinh trên cả nước trong các kỳ thi IELTS trong suốt hơn 26 năm vừa qua ha các bạn. Rồi, thì đầu tiên là chúng ta sẽ nói về cái mức độ công nhận của chứng nhận IELTS trên toàn cầu. Rồi, chúng ta có thể thấy thì IELTS được chứng nhận bởi hơn 12.000 tổ chức trên toàn thế giới và hiện đã trở thành một trong những cái bài kiểm tra tiếng Anh phổ biến nhất. Đối với lại các cái chính phủ như là Úc, Canada, New Zealand và Anh thì IELTS đều được chấp nhận để sử dụng cho mục đích định cư ha các bạn. Thì cái này cũng có thể cho thấy cái mức độ uy tín và cái độ tin cậy của kết quả IELTS trong những cái bài tiếng Anh để mà có thể đáp ứng yêu cầu nhập cư của các cái quốc gia này. Ngoài ra thì đối với lại cái việc tuyển dụng thì các nhà tuyển dụng hoặc là các trường đại học và cơ quan đăng ký ở trên toàn thế giới thì cũng đã chấp nhận kết quả kỳ thi IELTS, bao gồm cả rất là nhiều tổ chức tại Mỹ ha. Thì mình sẽ có thể thấy là IELTS, cái mức độ mà công nhận của cái chứng chỉ này hiện nay là không thể bàn cãi được, đúng không các bạn? Rồi, nếu mà bạn đang hướng tới những cái mục tiêu mà về học tập hoặc là làm việc hoặc là định cư tại nước ngoài thì IELTS chắc chắn là một công cụ rất là quan trọng giúp cho bạn có thể chinh phục được những cái ước mơ đó. Rồi. Nào. Thì như các bạn có thể nhìn thấy ở trên màn hình thì hàng năm có tới hàng triệu thí sinh đăng ký tham gia IELTS tại IDP. Hiện nay là nó đã được chấp nhận bởi hơn 12.000 tổ chức trên toàn thế giới, và bạn có thể hoàn toàn tin tưởng vào chất lượng cũng như uy tín của kỳ thi. Cái chứng chỉ IELTS này là đặc biệt quan trọng với những bạn mà có nhu cầu muốn đi du học, xin việc làm hoặc là phát triển sự nghiệp ở nước ngoài, nơi mà có những cái yêu cầu rất là cao về tiếng Anh ha các bạn. Thì với hơn 150 quốc gia tổ chức kỳ thi IELTS bạn có thể dễ dàng lựa chọn những cái lịch thi hoặc là địa điểm thi phù hợp với lại yêu cầu của mình. Hơn nữa là hơn 4.000 địa điểm thi trên toàn cầu cũng đã đáp ứng được nhu cầu thi IELTS của đông đảo các bạn thí sinh trên toàn thế giới. Ờm, các bạn cũng có thể thấy ở cái mục cuối cùng của chúng ta là IDP IELTS tổ chức thi tại hơn 4.000 địa điểm thi trên toàn thế giới, và không những chỉ như vậy mà còn được hơn 3.600 tổ chức và chương trình tại Mỹ công nhận ha các bạn. Nó sẽ mở ra rất là nhiều những cái cơ hội cho các bạn thí sinh mà muốn có nhu cầu du học hoặc tìm việc làm hoặc là phát triển sự nghiệp tại Hoa Kỳ. Rồi, khi mà nói đến IELTS thì các bạn có thể tự tin lựa chọn IELTS IDP để làm nơi có thể đạt được band điểm mơ ước của mình. Với danh tiếng và uy tín của IDP thì chúng tôi rất là hân hạnh được đồng hành và hỗ trợ các bạn trong hành trình ôn luyện và đạt được những cái kết quả tốt cho kỳ thi IELTS của mình ha các bạn. Rồi. Vậy thì mình sẽ cùng tìm hiểu những cái lợi thế khi mà các bạn có được cái chứng chỉ IELTS. Ừm, Lợi thế của chứng chỉ IELTS hiện nay là không thể bàn cãi được trong cái việc du học ha các bạn. Thì đây là một cái yêu cầu rất là quan trọng để nhập học tại các trường đại học hoặc là trường cao đẳng trên toàn thế giới, bởi vì đó là một cái tiêu chuẩn đánh giá năng lực tiếng Anh của bạn và giúp bạn có cơ hội mở rộng cơ hội học tập ở môi trường quốc tế. Ngoài ra thì đây cũng là một cái chứng chỉ quốc tế được công nhận rộng rãi. Nó chứng minh cho cái khả năng sử dụng tiếng Anh của các bạn trong cái tình huống giao tiếp hàng ngày hoặc là ở trong môi trường công sở cũng như là cả môi trường học thuật. Ờm, Ở một số những cái quốc gia như là Canada hoặc là Úc thì hiện nay là cái việc mà mình có chứng chỉ IELTS nó cũng hỗ trợ cho các bạn có thể miễn được cái kỳ thi tốt nghiệp trung học phổ thông. Điều này giúp các bạn tiết kiệm rất là nhiều những cái thời gian và công sức trong quá trình xin học tại các trường đại học ở quốc gia này ha. Rồi, ngoài ra thì kỳ thi cũng sẽ có thể mở ra những cái cơ hội cho các bạn được giao lưu và trao đổi văn hóa. Nó sẽ giúp cho các bạn rất nhiều trong cái việc là đăng ký vào các chương trình trao đổi quốc tế. Ngoài ra là chứng chỉ IELTS có vai trò quan trọng như mình đã đề cập trong việc là định cư, khi mà các bạn có thể thấy là rất là nhiều những cái quốc gia như là Úc, Canada, New Zealand và Anh thì hiện nay đều công nhận cái chứng chỉ IELTS để các bạn có thể nộp hồ sơ định cư ha. Đây là một cái điểm cộng cho các bạn có thể tăng cơ hội được nhận được cái visa định cư tại các quốc gia này. Về cái việc ghi điểm khi xin việc là không thể bàn cãi rồi. Hiện nay là có rất nhiều những nhà tuyển dụng trên toàn cầu đánh giá cao chứng chỉ IELTS và nó có thể chứng tỏ cho những người tuyển dụng thấy cái mức độ giao tiếp tiếng Anh của các bạn và tăng khả năng thành công của các bạn trong công việc, nơi mà những cái môi trường đó có thể là đòi hỏi cái kỹ năng tiếng Anh cao ha. Rồi, thì các bạn có thể thấy là đối với chứng chỉ IELTS các bạn có thể mở rộng được những cái cơ hội không chỉ về việc học tập mà còn về cả công việc và cuộc sống. Ờm, Hiện tại thì như mình có giới thiệu qua thì IDP đang có mặt tại 19 tỉnh thành trên khắp cả nước ha các bạn. Các bạn có thể thấy là mình sẽ rất là dễ dàng để liên hệ với lại IDP, và IDP cũng sẽ luôn lắng nghe những cái ý kiến và mong muốn của các bạn, cho nên là nếu mà các bạn thấy trên màn hình cái tỉnh thành của mình chưa có sự xuất hiện của IDP và các bạn muốn có sự xuất hiện của IDP tại tỉnh thành đó, các bạn cứ comment để bên mình ghi nhận cái ý kiến đó ha. Rồi. Một cái câu hỏi mà rất là nhiều bạn đặt ra cho IDP đó là nên thi IELTS trên máy tính hay là nên thi trên giấy. Thì đầu tiên á là mình sẽ có một cái lời khuyên cho các bạn, đó là các bạn nên lựa chọn cái lịch thi phù hợp với mình. Thì các bạn có thể tìm kiếm những cái lịch thi ở trên trang web hoặc là fanpage của IDP ha. Với kỳ thi trên giấy thì bên mình sẽ tổ chức từ 4 tới 5 lịch thi mỗi tháng. Còn đối với thi máy tính thì sẽ là từ là thứ hai đến chủ nhật, cho nên là các bạn có thể linh hoạt chọn những cái lịch thi máy tính nếu như mà các bạn cần thi trong tuần ha. Rồi, ngoài ra thì IDP cũng rất tự tin là đối với việc lựa chọn là thi trên máy hay là thi trên giấy thì bên mình cũng có thể đảm bảo những cái trải nghiệm thi tốt nhất cho các bạn thí sinh. Và các bạn nên chọn ngày thi IELTS mà các bạn cảm thấy thoải mái nhất ha. Nếu các bạn chọn bài thi trên giấy thì như các bạn có thể thấy ở trên màn hình hiện tại là các bạn có thể yên tâm về những cái yêu cầu và trải nghiệm của mình nó sẽ được đảm bảo. Đầu tiên là về cơ sở vật chất thì cơ sở vật chất tại IDP đạt chuẩn quốc tế thì sẽ đảm bảo cho các bạn môi trường thi thoải mái và rất là tiện nghi. Phòng thi được thiết kế rộng rãi, trang bị đầy đủ những cái thiết bị và tiện ích giúp các bạn hoàn toàn tập trung vào kỳ thi ha. Ờm, các cái giám khảo và giám thị thì cũng là những người rất là quan trọng trong kỳ thi của chúng ta. Các bạn sẽ tiếp xúc trực tiếp với lại giám khảo và giám thị trong ngày thi của mình đúng không các bạn? Thì đây đều là những người được đào tạo chuyên nghiệp và có thái độ thân thiện với thí sinh. Giám thị và giám khảo tại IDP luôn sẵn sàng hỗ trợ các bạn thí sinh trong suốt quá trình thi và đảm bảo mọi thủ tục diễn ra một cách suôn sẻ và công bằng. Ngoài ra thì điều đáng chú ý là bạn sẽ được chủ động lựa chọn lịch thi nói phù hợp với kế hoạch cá nhân của mình ha. IDP cung cấp nhiều lịch thi trong tháng giúp bạn dễ dàng chọn được ngày và giờ thi phù hợp với lịch trình của mình. Um, cái quy trình đăng ký tại IDP thì cực kỳ nhanh chóng và dễ dàng. Bạn có thể đăng ký trực tuyến hoặc là trực tiếp tại cơ sở của IDP. Mọi thủ tục đều rất là đơn giản và nhanh chóng để hoàn thiện, giúp cho các bạn có thể tiết kiệm thời gian và năng lượng của mình ha. Um, Nếu mà đến với IDP thì các bạn có thể tin tưởng là có được một cái trải nghiệm thi IELTS trên giấy vượt trội, đáp ứng đầy đủ mọi nhu cầu và yêu cầu của các bạn ha. IDP hiểu rằng là một môi trường thi thoải mái và hiện đại là yếu tố quan trọng trong cái việc giúp thí sinh đạt được những cái kết quả thi tốt. Đó là lý do tại sao các phòng thi trên máy tại IDP được trang bị cơ sở vật chất hiện đại và đáp ứng tiêu chuẩn quốc tế như các bạn có thể thấy trên màn hình. Thì đây là một cái hình ảnh minh họa cho phòng thi IELTS trên máy tính tại IDP ha. Đầu tiên là chúng ta sẽ có thể thấy là ví dụ như trụ sở mới tại 1612 Bà Trưng quận 3 của ở Hồ Chí Minh là một ví dụ điển hình ha. Phòng thi trên máy tính ở đây thì được thiết kế rất là rộng rãi và có không gian thoải mái, nội thất thì năng động và tạo cảm giác thoải mái cho thí sinh. Có những cái như là ví dụ như màn hình, tai nghe chống ồn và bộ lưu điện đều đảm bảo cái chất lượng và của kỳ thi và tiêu chuẩn của kỳ thi IELTS toàn cầu ha các bạn. Rồi, bạn sẽ có cái không gian riêng tư để mà truy cập vào những cái công cụ cần thiết một cách dễ dàng. Cho nên là các bạn có thể tự tin đến với phòng thi trên máy tính của IDP. IDP cam kết sẽ cung cấp cho các bạn một môi trường thi tốt nhất để các bạn có thể thể hiện hết những cái khả năng của mình trong kỳ thi IELTS. Cho nên là như các bạn có thể thấy, dù cho các bạn có lựa chọn kỳ thi IELTS trên máy tính hay là trên thi giấy thì format thi đều giống nhau 100% ha các bạn. Tuy nhiên thì nó sẽ có một số những cái điểm khác biệt nhỏ. Ờ, Như các bạn có thể thấy trên màn hình hiện tại là khi mà các bạn đăng ký thi trên máy tính thì kết quả thi nó sẽ nhanh hơn. Nó chỉ từ sau 1 đến 5 ngày là các bạn có thể nhận được cái kết quả thi của mình rồi. Nó nhanh hơn trên giấy. Và cái lịch thi nó cũng sẽ linh hoạt hơn. Như mình có đề cập thì hiện tại là kỳ thi trên máy tính được tổ chức từ thứ hai tới chủ nhật ha các bạn, có nghĩa là 7 ngày một tuần. Nó sẽ rất là linh hoạt cho các bạn thuận tiện chọn những cái ngày thi phù hợp với lịch trình của mình, đặc biệt là đối với những bạn mà có nhu cầu thi lấy bằng gấp đúng không? Thi cả 4 kỹ năng tại cùng một địa điểm cũng là một cái lợi thế của kỳ thi trên máy tính. Hiện nay thì khi mà các bạn đăng ký kỳ thi trên máy tính, các bạn có thể yên tâm là các bạn sẽ thi 4 kỹ năng trong cùng một ngày ha. Rồi nó sẽ giúp cho mình tiết kiệm rất là nhiều công sức và các bạn có thể đăng ký thi One Skill Retest sau 60 ngày kể từ ngày thi 4 kỹ năng. Nó sẽ giúp cho các bạn cải thiện điểm số tối đa. Này là nó sẽ chỉ áp dụng cho các cái bạn mà thi trên máy tính ha các bạn, kỳ thi One Skill Retest ha. Rồi, thì thật ra là không có cái hình thức thi nào nó tốt hơn hay là nó vượt trội hơn. Nhưng mà nó sẽ có những cái phù hợp đối với từng bạn thí sinh, cho nên là mình hãy tự lựa chọn những cái phương thức thi phù hợp với bản thân mình dựa trên lịch trình nè, hoặc những cái sự linh hoạt và ưu điểm riêng mà mỗi hình thức mang lại. Thì khi mà các bạn thi trên giấy hay là thi trên máy thì IDP cũng cam kết sẽ có thể cung cấp cho các bạn một môi trường thi tốt nhất và đáp ứng đủ các tiêu chuẩn quốc tế để các bạn có thể đạt được cái điểm thi mong muốn của mình. Ờm, rồi, khi đăng ký thi tại IDP từ ngày 1 tháng 5 đến ngày 30 tháng 6 cho tất cả các cái ngày thi, thì hiện nay đến hết tháng 12 năm 2024 ha các bạn, là đến cuối năm, thì các thí sinh được lựa chọn thi IELTS trên máy tính á, các ngày thi trong tuần ha các bạn. Và thi trên giấy tại 3 thành phố lớn như là Hồ Chí Minh, Hà Nội hoặc Đà Nẵng thì các bạn sẽ có những cái ưu đãi rất là hấp dẫn từ IDP. Đó là 6 loa Bluetooth Marshall, và tổng trị giá là 30 triệu. Phiếu quà tặng trị giá 300.000. Các bạn có thể thoải mái mua sắm tại rất là nhiều những cái thương hiệu lớn trên khắp cả nước ha. Ngoài ra thì có một cái mà các bạn thí sinh chắc chắn là sẽ rất là thích, đó chính là bộ ôn luyện IELTS duy nhất chỉ có tại IDP, trị giá 1,4 triệu ha. Và những cái phần quà rất là dễ thương mà các bạn có thể nhận được đó là đèn để bàn thông minh IELTS IDP hoặc là thảm lót chuột được thiết kế đặc biệt độc quyền từ IELTS IDP. Hiện tại thì IELTS IDP đã có 2 cái buổi livestream để tìm ra chủ nhân của 4 chiếc loa Marshall rồi, thì sẽ vẫn còn 2 chiếc loa nữa đang chờ đợi các bạn thí sinh, cho nên là bạn nào chưa đăng ký thi IELTS IDP thì hãy nhanh tay đăng ký nha các bạn. Đến hết ngày 30 tháng 6 ha, mình lưu ý cái hạn để có thể nhận được những cái ưu đãi này ha. Rồi, IDP còn có một tin vui cho các bạn thí sinh đang ôn luyện IELTS, đó chính là ứng dụng IELTS by IDP. Với cái ứng dụng này thì các bạn có thể thuận lợi và dễ dàng hơn rất là nhiều trong quá trình ôn luyện IELTS. Bạn không cần phải đi tìm những cái nguồn khác nhau để có thể ôn luyện nữa, mà trong quá trình ôn thi, trong khi thi và sau khi thi thì các bạn đều có thể thấy là cái sự hữu ích của cái ứng dụng này. Nó có thể giúp các bạn tiết kiệm rất là nhiều thời gian và năng lượng, và bạn có thể tìm thấy mọi thứ trong mỗi một cái ứng dụng này thôi. Từ những cái kiến thức căn bản nè, những cái mẹo ôn tập đến các bài tập và câu hỏi và câu trả lời mô phỏng, mọi thứ đều được cung cấp một cách toàn diện và rất là chất lượng ha các bạn. Rồi, ngoài ra thì ngoài cái ứng dụng IELTS IDP thì các bạn có thể thấy trên màn hình á là chúng ta còn có những cái kênh YouTube và TikTok của IELTS IDP để các bạn có thể tiếp cận những cái video học thuật bổ ích, các mẹo ôn tập, các cái bước chuẩn bị hiệu quả và những lời khuyên từ các chuyên gia về IDP. Những cái video này được thiết kế rất là dễ xem, gần gũi và cũng dễ để các bạn có thể học tập một cách tự nhiên. Các bạn có thể ấn nút subscribe trên các cái nền tảng này ha. Kênh YouTube và kênh IELTS, kênh TikTok của IELTS IDP ha các bạn. Thì các bạn sẽ không có bỏ lỡ những cái thông tin hữu ích để mà có thể ôn tập trong cái quá trình ôn luyện thi IELTS của mình. Đối với cái buổi hội thảo ngày hôm nay, nếu như mà có bạn bè nào của các bạn đang xem mà có thể là bỏ lỡ mất cái buổi này, hoặc là các bạn nào mà cảm thấy là mình muốn xem lại, thì các bạn có thể truy cập vào những cái kênh này của IELTS IDP để có thể xem lại ha, các bạn đừng lo lắng ha. Rồi, các bạn có thể hỗ trợ các cái bạn bè của mình bằng cách share những cái kênh này để các bạn của mình cùng ôn tập với mình luôn ha. Rồi, chia sẻ kiến thức và tận hưởng trải nghiệm đáng giá với cộng đồng IELTS là một cái các bạn có thể yên tâm khi mà đồng hành cùng IDP trong quá trình ôn luyện của mình. Thì tiếp sau đây mình sẽ đến với thầy Simon Brown là chuyên gia IELTS IDP ha. Các bạn sẽ có những cái tips hữu ích trong cái kỳ thi sắp tới của mình. Thầy Simon Brown sẽ bắt đầu chia sẻ cho các bạn những cái phần thông tin hữu ích ha.
Good morning, everyone. Let me just share my screen with you. Just bear with me a moment. And welcome to the IELTS Speaking Experts Workshop. And this is going to be a little talk about how to maximize your score, produce your best in the speaking test. And we're going to also focus a little bit on the video call speaking test, also known as VCS, seeing as how this is online. So in the first part, we're going to look at an overview of the test. And then we'll look at some things that you should and should not do in the test as well as some things that you don't need to do. And then we'll look at each part of the test and see what's involved. And then we'll look at how the test is marked and how your language is assessed. Then, like I said earlier, we'll do a little bit on the VCS test and how that's different from the face-to-face test. And then we'll finish off with a conclusion for this show. And maybe if there's time afterwards, we'll do a little mock speaking test followed by some questions from you all, which I'll answer. Okay, so let's start on the overview of the IELTS test, VCS. What do you need to bring with you? Well, not very much, as it turns out, just your ID, your passport or national ID card. Yeah, so that's the same as with the face-to-face test. The difference is that in VCS, you will not have to present it to the examiner because, of course, they're online. So you will present it to the test day staff. But make sure you don't forget your ID. Of course, it's very important that you bring that. So how is the test structured? Well, it's the same as the face-to-face test. So there are three parts. Part one is between 4 and 5 minutes long, and the questions are personal in nature. So they'll be about you, your life, or life in your country. And there are some introductory questions at the start as well. Part two is between 3 and 4 minutes long, and this is a long talk related to usually your life in some way or an experience that you've had. And then part three, it's the same length as part one, so between 4 and 5 minutes. And these are the questions here are more general in nature, and it's related. The topic is related to the topic in part two. There are no real differences in the VCS test that you would notice between that and the face-to-face test. So how is speaking assessed? Well, there are the same 4 categories as in the face-to-face test. So one is fluency and coherent, meaning is your speech fluent and structured well? We'll go into more details in these categories later. Lexical resource is the second one, which is just a fancy way of saying vocabulary. So is a good range of vocabulary used, and is it used accurately? Next, we have grammatical range and accuracy. So is a wide range of grammar features used? And again, are those features used accurately? And are they used flexibly as well? Finally, there's pronunciation. So is a range of pronunciation features used? And we'll look at that in more detail later, what we mean by pronunciation features. And is speech easy to understand? All right, so things you should and should not do during the test. We'll start with do's. Make sure you arrive early, of course. So make sure that you understand, the parking arrangements of the building, the test center you're going to, and exactly how to get there, because you need to arrive about 10-15 minutes early to give you some time to take in your surroundings and relax. Now, it is important, of course, that you relax before you go into the test, because we all produce our best performance in anything really when you're in a relaxed state of mind. So yeah, as I said, arrive early to help with that. And also, if you get nervous, there are some things that you can do to calm your nerves before you go in. So some things you can do: you can go for a walk if you've got time. But there's something also called the stop technique. Now, this is commonly used in job interviews or before job interviews, or any stressful situation. And stop stands for S, which means stop what you're doing. T, take some deep breaths. So in through your nose and out through your mouth. Now, if you do that 6 times or so, you will feel yourself starting to relax. The O stands for observe. So ask yourself, why do I feel like this? And then think, actually, it's not that bad. It's not a dangerous situation. And then P is proceed. So continue thinking about, what you've just learned. Some other things you can do: you can eat a good meal before, but make sure you don't do that just before you go in, because if you do that, you'll feel very sleepy, and you won't produce a good performance. But it's important to eat maybe a couple of hours before you go in, and make sure you get enough water to drink as well. Another thing you can do is to plan something for afterwards, to meet your friends in a cafe or something like that. It helps to take your mind off the situation and gives you something to look forward to afterwards. Now, the next one is not for everyone, but if you're this kind of a person, you can talk to yourself in a mirror if you're not shy, and use your nerves to help get excited. Say things like, you can do this. Like I say, that's not for everyone. Now, if the examiners, if they're do their job properly, and they certainly should be, they will help you to relax, and that is with the aim of getting you to produce your best language. So to produce good language as well, you need to make sure that you understand the examiner's questions. So the way we do that is to ask the examiner to repeat a question, or you can ask what a word means. You can ask for a definition. We'll get into that in more detail later. If you do that, your speech will be more coherent. It will relate to the question better. And if you don't do that, you might think you're answering the question, but actually you've gone a bit off topic, which is not great, as we will talk about later. So you need to try to develop your answers, give reasons, extra details. Again, we'll go into that in more detail later. The aim of the IELTS speaking test, well, all of the IELTS test, is to show how much language you know. So if you answer a question just yes or no, that's not really showing off your language very well. So you need to give more information. Some things you should not do. So don't give memorized answers. It's not a good idea. You will not be directly penalized for that, unlike in writing, because in writing, if you produce an entirely memorized response, you get band 0. It's not quite the same in speaking, but it's still not a good idea because it's very easy to tell when somebody is giving a memorized answer. It just doesn't sound natural. And memorized language is generally not considered when assessing language. So it's much better to just answer the questions naturally. Also, don't worry if the examiner interrupts you. It's not them being rude. The test has very strict time limits. So if time runs out, the examiner has to move on to the next part, and that often means that they will interrupt you. Also, don't ask the examiner too many questions. Remember, it's your speaking test. The examiner is not there to answer your questions. You're there to answer their questions. So, but what you can do is to ask if you're not sure what the examiner said or meant. So what do you not need to do? Well, you don't need to dress smartly. Many people think you do, but you don't. Jeans and a t-shirt are just fine. But I would still say it's a good idea because, you need to try and create a good impression. And some people find that dressing up smartly can help with their confidence as well. But it's really up to you. You don't actually have to tell the truth or give your real opinions. And the same is true with the writing test as well. You need to remember that the examiner has no idea who you are. They've never met you before. So you can, as long as you use good English, good language, and your answer makes sense, then it doesn't matter if you tell the truth or not. So it's quite a good idea with IELTS speaking to get very good at lying. You'll find that's quite a useful skill, especially if you get an unfamiliar topic. So let's look at the different parts of the IELTS speaking test now. So of course, there's part 1, as we talked about earlier. Now, this is considered to be the least difficult part of the test. And why is that? Well, there are up to 12 questions, and the questions are about your life or life in your country. So they're quite personal in nature, so they're not so difficult to answer. However, you may get some questions that you don't understand completely. Now, if this happens, you can ask the examiner to repeat the question. They will only do that once, by the way. Or you can ask for the definition of a word. That's absolutely fine. If you do that, the examiner will give a short definition of the word you don't know. Don't ask the examiner to rephrase the question, because if you do that, they will simply repeat the question. And again, if you say you don't understand, again, the examiner will simply repeat the question. Now, in part 1, you should be aiming for about 2 long sentences for each answer. Now, that's about 20 to 25 seconds. That should be enough to answer all of the questions well. Now, part 2. The examiner will start by giving you instructions, introducing what's going to happen, and then it will check that you understand those instructions. Then you are given some paper and a pencil for making notes on and preparing the topic. Of course, in VCS, the notes, the paper and the pencil are in front of you already. You can ask for an explanation of the question or unknown vocabulary if you're not sure what the question is asking you to do. But if you do that, try to do it as soon as you can. Don't wait. If you see anything on the question that you are not sure about, ask the examiner immediately. Of course, you get 1 minute to prepare your answers. to prepare your answer. And in that time, you need to make your notes. And after the 1 minute preparation time has finished, you will then speak for a minimum of 1 minute and a maximum of 2 minutes. And then you need to, at the end of your talk, answer a follow-up question that the examiner will answer you. Okay, so you need to start making notes as soon as you get the topic. Don't wait. It helps you to organize your answer. And it is quite a long time to speak, 2 minutes. Even for a native speaker, it's, without stopping, it's not an easy thing to do. So your notes will help to guide you, and so that you don't lose where you are. And don't forget important details as well. You can also make a note of good vocabulary that you will use. It doesn't matter if you write it down. You've thought of it. If you write it down, you use it, it counts. So it's a good idea to do that. Try to speak for the full 2 minutes if you can. Now, if you are still speaking after 2 minutes, the examiner will stop you. However, if you finish your talk a little bit early and don't wish to continue, let the examiner know. You can say something like, "Thank you, that's it, I'm finished." Just make it clear to the examiner that you want to stop. If you finish a little bit too early, say after 1 minute, you just stop speaking. The examiner will wait a little bit of time and then they will try to get you speaking again. But if aside from that, the examiner will just allow you to speak. They won't generally say anything. In part 3, now, many people consider this to be the most difficult part. Other people consider part 2 to be difficult because they have to speak for a long time. But most people consider part 3 to be the most difficult part. Now, the topic, as I mentioned earlier, is related to your talk in part 2. And the questions in part 3 become much more general and impersonal. And because of that, you should avoid talking about yourself. If you do, the examiner will ask you questions to try to get you to speak about things more generally. You will be asked for your opinions at points. And remember, if you don't have an opinion on the topic, you've never really thought about it before, remember, the opinions don't have to be real. They don't have to be your opinions. You can just invent them. That's absolutely fine, as long as you use good English to explain them. Now, the questions are not always scripted. The examiner will react to the answers that you give by asking you more questions based on your answers, and it becomes more like a discussion. However, the questions can get very challenging. They tend to get more difficult, especially towards the very end of the test. But if you are really stuck with anything the examiner has asked you, you can ask for the definitions of words you don't know. You can also, in part 3, unlike in part 1, you can ask the examiner to rephrase the question, and they will do that for you. They will change the wording of the question so it's easier for you to understand. Okay, so let's talk now about how the test is marked. So the first category, as I mentioned, is fluency and coherence. Now, what do we mean by fluency? Fluency is, hesitation. Now, there are 2 types of hesitation. One is content related, and the other is language related. So content related means you are preparing in your mind what do you want to say next. And language-related hesitation is because you're trying to think of the vocabulary or grammar structures that you need to produce the answers. And how do you know the difference? Well, content-related happens generally at the start of a sentence, whereas language-related hesitation, it means you get to the middle of a sentence and you start going, and that's because you're thinking of language to say. So what else do we mean by fluency? It's repetition and self-correction. So are you repeating yourself? Are you correcting your grammar structures a lot and your vocabulary a lot? You can improve both of these things by pausing briefly to think before you start speaking. This allows you some time to prepare your answer in your head, and this will prevent you from getting to the middle of a sentence and hesitating, which will, of course, be interpreted as language-related hesitation. So if you pause before you start speaking, then it will not actually affect your fluency score. Whereas if you just start speaking and not really considering what you say before you start speaking, you'll get to the middle of a sentence and then start hesitating, and that will affect your fluency score. Now, you can use some fillers if you need to just to give you a little bit of time to think. For example, you could say, I haven't really thought about that before. That's an interesting question. Just gives you a little bit of time, and you fill those kind of silences with a bit of language. Don't do it for every answer, though, because it sounds a bit strange after a while. Okay, what do we mean by coherence? So coherence is the logical ordering of your speech and something called topic development, how you develop your ideas. Now, we can use linking words are known as cohesive devices in IELTS. Basic ones are the ones we all get taught in elementary classes, and, but, or, so, because. But there are also more advanced cohesive devices as well, such as however, also, in addition, whereas, that kind of thing. But there are also others. Ordering points, for example, firstly, secondly, then, next, finally. There are also ones for sounding less direct. If you want to talk in a more general and impersonal way, which you may well be asked to do. You could say things like sort of, or people tend to. There are also ones for showing attitude, like hopefully, fortunately, obviously, clearly. Try to use as wide a range of these linking words, cohesive devices as you can, and that will help to increase your coherence score. Now, let's look at lexical resource. Now, what do we mean by that? We talk about range of vocabulary. We talked about that before. Now, you can use things like descriptors for words to increase your range. So what do we mean? We mean adverbs. We can also paraphrase language. So paraphrase the questions. Think of different words that you can use, synonyms, different sentence structures to paraphrase the language in the questions, but also paraphrase yourself. Don't keep repeating the language that you use. Now, you can improve your range of vocabulary by reading books and articles, newspaper articles, things like that, blogs in English. It's called extensive reading. You might think of it as reading for pleasure. It's a great way for learning vocabulary, and it is how native speakers improve their vocabulary. But it's not just about the range. It's also about the accuracy of the vocabulary that you used. If you want to get the really high band scores in lexical resource, you need to try to use the vocabulary as accurately and precisely as you can. So the more accurate and precise it is, the better. Now, it's important to use accurate collocations. So an example of that would be make a mistake, not do a mistake. And also try to convey precise meaning. So an example of that would be fur when we're talking about cats. We don't use the word hair like we would for people. Next, we have grammatical range and accuracy. So again, it's about range and accuracy, as with all parts of the, the criteria you are marked on. So is the candidate using a range of grammar structures? Now, what do we mean? We mean complex sentences. So an example of complex sentences would be sentences with a conjunction and a subordinate clause. So, for example, I go to work at 7 o'clock and then I check my emails when I get there, something like that. Relative clauses. So like, for example, the man that is standing over there is looking at you. And then you can also have conditionals. So if this happens, then something else happens. Modal verbs are also important. So verbs like could, should, would, can. There are lots of ways that modal verbs can be used. So try to learn a few of those. Noun phrases, I mentioned one of those before, like you have a phrase for the subject of a sentence, like, for example, the man standing over there is looking at you. So, of course, the subject of that sentence is a noun phrase, the man standing over there. And you need to try to use a range of tenses. So, for example, if you're talking about the past, when you were a child, you could use things like used to and would, and not just the past simple. Or you could use future tenses like will, or maybe even future perfect, will have been. Try to use as many different tenses as you can and try to use them accurately. So what do we mean by the accuracy? So how many errors are there in the sentences? And do those errors cause difficulty with understanding? So, of course, the more errors there are, the more difficult it is for the listener to understand, then generally the lower the band score will be. But try to be as ambitious as you can. Don't use simple language and try to get it all right. You will not be rewarded for that. It's very important that you use as wide a range as you can and worry about fixing the errors later. So you get more credit for being ambitious with your language. Even if you make lots of mistakes, you will generally get a higher score if you use more complex language. The last category is pronunciation. So try to use a range of pronunciation features. Now, English is what's called a stress-timed language. Now, what do we mean by stress timing? We could talk about syllable stress in words, like, for example, computer, things like that. You stress the middle syllable in that word. But it's also about sentence stress. So, you stress the content words in sentences like main verbs, adverbs, adjectives, and, in question words, you would stress question. In questions, you would stress question words like what, how, why. But also, stress can be used for more advanced language as well. Like for contrast, for example, you would say something like, my father is a history teacher, but I am a maths teacher. So you see how we've stressed maths and I in that sentence. Now, where you have stress timing, you also have weak forms. So that's the sound. So the grammar words in English, like prepositions, for example, are generally not stressed. They take the weak form. So the stress timing in a sentence has a certain rhythm. So if the sentences have a good rhythm and also there's good use of intonation, then that will help to improve your pronunciation score. Now, it can be a difficult thing to get an intonation. Because it's not a tonal language, quite often lower level learners think that that English is flat. It's not. As you can hear from my voice, it's kind of bouncing up and down all over the place. But it's done obviously in a different way from Vietnamese. Now, another feature of pronunciation in English is connected speech. So we love to stick words together in English. And there are different ways of doing this. We can link consonant and vowel sounds, for example. So a phrase like think about it, think about it, think about it. We don't have each word separate. They're all stuck together. Another way we can do it is by something called assimilation, so linking consonant sounds. So something like more rice, more rice. It sounds like more ice. If you stick them together, yeah, we say more rice. But you can also say something like red ball. So we don't say red ball. Again, that slows our speech down. We don't like doing that in English, so we try to stick words together. Red ball. It sounds like red ball, as I put in brackets there, square brackets. Another way of connecting speech is by something called elision. What do we mean by this? It's dropping sounds so that it's easier to say the word. Yeah, like I say, we don't like to slow down, so any difficult sounds in words, we generally omit them. So we wouldn't say grandma, for example. We would say grandma to say it quickly. But also this works between words as well. We would not say most famous. We'd say most famous. So dropping the T sound. Another way is something called intrusion. And this is in adding extra consonant sounds between vowel sounds. So for example, you would not say so old. We'd say so old. So we've got an extra little word sound there, so old. Or the only one. So we've got the only, stick them together, the only, yeah, we've got a yeah sound there. Another one is China is big. We don't say it like that. We say China is. So we get an extra r sound there. China is big. Okay, so the next part of this is errors as well. So how many pronunciation errors are there? And do these errors make speech difficult to understand? So as with the other parts, the more errors there are with pronunciation, the lower the score will be. And if the errors make speech difficult to understand, then generally, of course, the score will get lower. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the VCS test now, the video call speaking test. So before you start, you'll be taken into the test room by the test invigilator. And the examiner will already be on screen waiting for you. You will need to put on a headset. The invigilator will help you that and make sure it fits you and it's nice and comfortable. Now, this headset will help you to hear the examiner's questions more clearly. As I mentioned, the invigilator and the examiner will ensure that you are comfortable and that you can hear clearly before the exam starts. Now, for the VCS test, you can expect a very clear sound and a fast connection, so there won't be any delay between what the examiner asks you and what you hear. So during the test, make sure you are always speaking clearly, as you would with the face-to-face test, of course. Try not to touch the headset or the mic or any of the other equipment because this can affect the sound quality. For example, some people think that they will be heard more clearly if they put the mic right in front of their mouth. This does not help because actually it produces, it's too loud for the examiner and it can distort your voice. So just once it's in the correct place, just leave it alone. So don't touch the test materials, meaning the pencil and paper, until you are instructed to in part 2. So in part 2, the topic appears on your screen. As soon as it appears on your screen, start making notes immediately. Don't wait for any other instructions. Once your screen has got the topic on it, the time for you to make notes has already started. If you start to experience problems with your connection or with the sound, make sure that you let the examiner know immediately or the invigilator. Once the test has finished, the examiner will let you know that, and then you can simply take off your headset and leave the test room. So some questions about VCS. Do I need to do anything with the computer? No, you don't. It's all worked out for you. The invigilator and the examiner will take care of any technical issues. Is there any time lag? Do I need to pause between sentences? Well, yes, of course, it's over the internet. There is some time lag, but the connection is fast, so you will not notice the time lag. You can just speak as if you were in the same room as the examiner. So what do I do if there's a problem with the sound connection? So point to the headset, indicate there's a problem to the examiner, and then they will if the examiner can't hear you, you need to get the attention of the invigilator. But it should be noted that problems don't happen very often with VCS. It's usually a very smooth process. So, in conclusion, what should I do to succeed in the IELTS speaking test? Read extensively, as I mentioned before, to improve your vocabulary. So read books, read articles, blogs, in English. They're written by native speakers using the language naturally, flexibly, in context. You get a much clearer idea of, English vocabulary and how it should be used doing this, and it will improve your vocabulary. Try to find a study buddy. Ideally, there should be a native speaker. I appreciate that's not always easy to do. And finally, practice. Practice makes perfect. So that concludes our talk for today on the VCS test and the IELTS speaking test more generally. Do we have time to do a mock speaking? I believe we do. So I will be taking requests for that. Okay, so I have a candidate here. All right, we'll do a full speaking test. Can I just check? Can you hear me fine? Can I hear
hello?
you? Hello.
Yes, hello. I can hear you well. Can you hear me well?
I can hear you perfectly. Okay,
Thank
let's make a start. Then we'll do like a mock speaking test now, all three parts if we can. I think we've got time to do that.
you. Great. Yes. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Yes.
My name is Simon Brown. Can you tell me your full name, please?
My name is Minho, so you can call me Minho for short.
Thank you. And can you tell me where you're from?
I'm from Vietnam. Actually, I'm from a Bình Phước province, which is a remote area in Vietnam. My area is famous for cashew nuts. In case you don't know, that is a normally we know it as a golden fruit in Vietnam.
Now, in this first part, I'd like to ask you some questions about yourself. Let's talk about what you do. Do you work or are you a student?
At the moment, I'm working as a government official in Bình Phước province. So my job mainly includes talking with foreigners and how to whenever the foreigners want to come to make a deal with our province, I'm going to be the one who meet them and mostly like work as a translator.
When did you decide to do this kind of job?
At first, I thought that I would have a great chance to meet a wide range of businessmen coming from all walks of life, and in fact, it was. So then it turned out that it was a great chance for me to meet so many business owners in my province, which is great for my career future.
Let's talk about celebrations. Where do you usually celebrate New Year?
Yes, at home, of course, because as a Vietnamese, I normally gather with my family in Tet holidays and any kind of a special holiday. So especially in the New Year, like we gather in the evening, like we stay up late so to celebrate that kind of special event.
What is the best celebration you have ever had?
Let me guess. Well, actually, like I can't tell exactly what it is at the moment. So I think I like the last yes, the celebration that I enjoy the most recently will be like the celebration that I had with my family a couple of years ago with my father. At that time, he was still alive. I mean, yeah, then now he just passed away. So at that moment was really memorable to me.
Is there anything you cook for special occasions?
I'm sorry, can you rephrase the question?
Is there anything you cook for special occasions?
Well, let me think about that. Okay, so actually, I don't really have a definite answer for this one, but I believe that anyone I mean any event which can bring up any special emotion in me would be considered as a special event for me, especially like anything considered at a milestone. For example, the decision I made to choose the school when I was a high school student can also be considered as a milestone or a special event in my life.
Why do people try to change something at New Year?
I think because people are keen on the concept of New Year revolution when they want to have a new version of themselves. That's the reason why that it encouraged them to like try something new and make a new version. But it turns out most of the case fails because they just did the same thing as the previous year.
Let's talk about being happy. What makes you happy?
That's tough. I think like most of the ordinary people, then money would make me happy as it can bring me a lot of pleasures buying new stuff. It give me the chance to splurge on things that I like clothes or like wristwatch.
Now I'm going to give you a topic and I'd like you to talk about it for 1 to 2 minutes. Before you talk, you'll have 1 minute to think about what you're going to say. You can make some notes if you wish. Do you understand?
Yes. Can I have some time to take a pen and a paper?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm ready.
You will see some paper and a pencil for making notes, and your topic will appear on screen soon. I'd like you to describe a job you would like to do. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
So I will go with this one, right?
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
All right. Remember, you have 1 minute for this, 1 to 2 minutes for this. So don't worry if I stop you. I'll tell you when the time is up. Can you start speaking now, please?
Yes. So I would like to talk about my ideal job in the future. Then, so back in the time when I was a child, I used to dream to become a businessman who owned a lot of money. Then gradually, it turned out that I'm not pretty suitable for this position because I lack of bravery. So then at the moment, I'm working as a government official. So it gave me a chance to meet a wide range of people from all walks of life. So I know that so many business opportunity. That's why it comes to me that given all the advantages, competitive advantages that I'm having at the moment, I think like being the businessman working in the education industry can be considered as a golden opportunity for me. So in case you don't know, I'm living in Bình Phước province, which is a quite a remote area, and we don't have a lot of chance to learn English in my areas. That's why I hope that in the future it will be great if I can be an educator working in a foreign language, not only English but also Chinese. So and it also be a great a golden opportunity for me if I can brings my students to foreign countries like China or Australia or Canada. That's going to be perfect for me, and I hope that by the time that I turned 40, I will have a company working in this kind of industry, and also have some agents in another country to collaborate closely with me so that I can bring students from my living place.
Thank you. Do you think you will your job will change?
Yeah, definitely. I believe so, because my current job is to some extent quite tedious and repetitive.
Thank you. Please put the paper and pencil down. We've been talking about a job you would like to do, and I'd like to discuss with you one or two more general questions related to this.
Sure. Yeah.
Let's consider first of all jobs that people do in your country. So, what jobs do you think young people are generally interested in these days?
I think from my observation, then young people enjoy doing something creative, like being a YouTuber or vlogger. The current generation, they enjoy doing something like really like bring them freedom rather than something repetitive like the older generation. So the other trend I noticed that people and most a lot of youngsters they inherit a lot of a huge fortune from their family, so they intend to do something for their pleasure rather than something require a lot of commitment.
Well, you mentioned being
an accountant.
You mentioned their being YouTubers and influencers. So is this having an effect on the more kind of traditional jobs that people did in the past, or people wanted to do in the past, like being a doctor or a teacher? Do you think there are fewer people who want to do that now?
I think because the demand still stays the same, people still need doctors and people working in a specialized industry. So I think the demand the workforce maybe stay the same, or to some extent we will see a surge in those industries. Like I taught doctors as an example for this. And previously, people only pay attention for the health, but now they pay attention to a healthy life. And because of that, doctor, they will have more jobs than before, and as a result, it will translate into have bigger income for their life. So I think it just the way they do the job will be different at the moment.
So is it common now to have people doing many jobs in their careers, or do people tend to stick to one job for their whole working lives?
Okay, so I know a group of people who enjoy hustling in their free time. I mean, that they can take up 3 or 4 jobs and with like their schedule so that they can earn bigger money. You know that these days there is a famous saying said like 2 people no child but double income. So that's people in like tends to work harder and earn more money and splurge on the thing that they like, because I believe that we are encouraging the consumerism in our country. So they tend to spend more money, and the only way that they can do so is to earn more money.
Let's move on now and think about technology and work. So overall in Vietnam, how do you think technology has affected work in the last 10 years or so?
All right. So I believe like technology has so many like impacts, like so much impact on the workforce generally. Taking ChatGPT invention as an example for this, before people do the work, mostly like mentally or physically demanding, but then now with the help of ChatGPT, then people can just use a short prompts to instruct ChatGPT to give out the desired outcome, and then they get it. I mean, like they become more mentally lazy, and they can also get the thing that they want. So.
So do you think there could be any negative consequences of using artificial intelligence in work?
I think that it really depends on the way that we depends on it. I mean, like on the one way, if you extremely relies on like the suggestion of ChatGPT instead of depending on your own ability, then it's
Thank you very much. That is the end of the mock speaking test. Thank you. Okay, let's. I have made some notes on what you said, but they are a bit of a mess. So just bear with me while I try to interpret them. Yeah. Let's talk about each category. So fluency, I thought you did pretty well. You generally spoke fluently. There wasn't much hesitation. You used cohesive devices well and flexibly as well, which is important. So you used like linking words and phrases. I think you said at one point, I didn't write this down, but people who wanted to do so. So when you say to do so, that's a back reference. You're talking about something that you said before. So that is a good use of cohesive devices, and are quite sophisticated as well. With your lexical resource, there was a good range of vocabulary used. So I heard words like specialized industry. That's a good collocation. A surge in, I think you were talking about doctors and, recruiting doctors. So you talked about a surge in recruitment and also spending money. You used the word splurge, which is, that's a good use of that word. There was some inaccuracy in the use of your vocabulary. So you were talking about New Year, and I think you said New Year revolution, whereas the word you should have used was resolution. So minor errors like that, but generally it was very good. Grammar, I think. Yeah, there were quite a few grammar errors that you made, but you did use a lot of structures and you used them quite flexibly as well. So that was good, and it was generally not difficult to understand. What you were saying, despite the errors that you made.
Yeah.
Pronunciation, again, very clear. What you were saying throughout. There were some errors with things like, connected speech here and there. It wasn't, and your rhythm and intonation wasn't entirely correct. But yeah, not too many problems with that either. It was generally very clear what you were saying. So overall, yeah, it was a very good performance. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I believe we're moving.
Yeah.
I believe we're moving on to a Q&A session now, if I'm not much mistaken. Okay.
I'm sorry, because I saw like the signal of mute. So
Hello. So I'll look through some of the questions here. So in speaking part 3, if I don't know how to answer, can I ask an examiner to ask other questions? You can do that, but I would generally advise that you don't. Try your best to answer the question. And as I said, if it's because you don't have any ideas, you can always invent them. It's best to be better prepared when you go in. So a good way to do that, as I mentioned, would be to just read in your spare time so that you've generally got a good idea of, the topics that you could be asked about. Nevertheless, you could get asked a question that you really have no ideas about, but it's important that you at least try to answer the questions. And if you have trouble with the vocabulary in the questions, you can get the examiner to make it a bit easier for you to understand. Right. So let's see. Any more questions here? When I give my example in part 3, could I talk about myself? You should generally avoid doing that. What you can do is you can take an example from your personal life and go and use that to illustrate your answer in a general way. So you could think about an experience that you've had and try to make it more general. But yeah, in general, you should avoid talking about yourself directly. Please give me some tips to show my vocabulary, to show off my vocabulary, I think you mean, in speaking. I know many words, but I still do not know how to use them. Okay. I think this is something that really just comes with practice. Just keep doing practice tests again and again. The more you use vocabulary, the more you get used to using vocabulary, and the better your score will be in lexical resource. So yeah, it's really just a case of practice, I would say. Okay. I would like to do a mock test. Unfortunately, we only have time for one. Sorry about that. Excuse me, I need to study vocabulary and ideas of native speakers. What websites can I study? It's a good question. Well, there are certain, I guess you could read Western media, like say, like Voice of America, usually have some good stuff on there to help you study things from the perspective of native speakers, American native speakers. That is, it's an American website. You could also, I guess, you could try reading sites like the Telegraph or the Guardian, if you want to hear about things happening in the UK. Or it's really up to you. You can read blogs if that's what interests you about food or anything really. Just you look at any subjects, any topics that come up in IELTS. You can just search them and find blogs on them, or written by native speakers. Do you lose points badly if we don't talk enough in part 2? Well, it really depends. If you don't produce much language in that time, then obviously that will affect your score. If you produce some good speech and speak for, say, 1 minute and 30 seconds, and then you run out of ideas, that's still a pretty good sample of language, and it won't affect your score a great deal. But ideally, you should be trying to speak for the full 2 minutes if you can. Of course, that's not easy to do, but that's why we make notes. They will help you to complete the talk. So Does asking examiners to repeat or rephrase questions and asking for definitions lower my scores? No, it won't. Not directly anyway, but if you spend the whole test asking questions of the examiners, then you're not going to give yourself enough time to produce language. So to a certain extent, it won't directly affect your score, but if you do it a lot, then you don't give yourself the chance to produce good language. If I use idioms or collocations, but I mispronounce them, am I marked low for that? So is my score reduced? To an extent, yes. I didn't really talk much about idioms before. Now, it is good to use some idiomatic language, but it's more important that the idioms are well chosen and used naturally. I think many IELTS training centers tell their students, you need to use idioms a lot. You don't. If you use idioms all the time, then you will generally, it sounds a bit strange. Okay, so it's more important that you use a few idioms here or there, but use them accurately and naturally. And it's also more important that you use less common vocabulary and use it accurately as well. So what does it say here? A little pause before the answer after the, oh, sorry, where's that gone? After the examiners ask a question doesn't affect my scores. No, it won't. If it's done before you produce your answer, then it won't affect your score. If you get to the middle of a sentence and you start hesitating, then that's interpreted as language-related hesitation, and that will lower your score in fluency. Can I say gonna in the IELTS speaking exam? Yeah, sure. Of course you can. But thinking about slang more generally, it's probably not a good idea to use too much slang, because the IELTS test it's a formal situation, and slang language is it's not really useful. It's not really appropriate for the circumstances. So yeah, I would avoid slang in general. But that's a very natural thing for native speakers to say, meaning going to, of course. So yeah, that's absolutely fine. It's just use of kind of weak forms, really, and it's very natural use of that. Could you recommend great books to learn English? Well, I would say to improve your vocabulary, I would say just read novels. If that's what interests you, read classic English novels, or even the American novels as well, like Charles Dickens, Great Expectations, things like that. Or you could read more modern work if that's what's good, if that's what interests you. Yeah, they all help to improve your vocabulary, and they are, of course, they're written by native speakers, meaning that the language is good, it's used in context, and doesn't generally contain errors. So what can I do if I understand the questions, but I do not know how to answer the questions, even in my native language? Well, try to give it your best shot. Some of them are not easy to answer. You need to give yourself a little bit of time to think about these. It's perfectly understandable to get questions you'd be not expecting in part 3. It's perfectly acceptable to just pause for a little while and think about what your answer could be. Yeah, but do try to give it your best shot. What structure should I use for IELTS speaking in part 3? I'm not sure entirely what you mean by that. Do you mean what grammar structures? Well, I think it was you I was talking to before, wasn't it? So you did a perfectly good job with answering the part 3 questions. You gave your opinions. I think, yeah, in general, your answers should be general and impersonal in nature. So, like I said before, don't spend too much time talking about yourself. What does it say here? Sometimes I feel part 2 is like 2.5 minutes. It's not. It's there are strict time limits, like I said. Sometimes it just feels like it's going for longer than it actually is. If I only have a short time to practice, should I pay more attention to fluency or vocabulary? Well, each of the criteria are marked is marked equally, so you should really devote an equal amount of attention to both. But generally, if you have a wide range of vocabulary, you will be able to produce speech more fluently, because you'll be able to produce that vocabulary quickly. So yeah, they really help each other. But I would say learn the vocabulary and then practice using it, and that will help to improve your fluency. Could you recommend some good websites to practice pronunciation? I can't think of any off the top of my head. I would say a good way. Well, I mean, try to just Google search English pronunciation and see what videos come back. You'll find some on YouTube. I'm certain of that. But yeah, in general, it's good to practice with people who are near native level, native speaker level of the language to get your pronunciation to improve. How can I change my accent to have a better accent like the same as British or American? Well, to produce, I think what you're really referring to is rhythm and intonation. But yeah, I think this really just comes with practice. So practice all the features. It's not expected that you'll speak with either a British or an American accent. You will. It is expected that you will have some kind of a Vietnamese accent in your speech. So yeah, don't worry too much about the accent. Just focus on the other features of the language, like I said, connected speech, rhythm and intonation, and making sure that you stick your words together using connected speech, things like that. That's what's most important. How long should the answers in part 3 be? That's a good question. I didn't really touch on that before. They should be ideally a little bit longer than in part 1. Now, I said 20 to 25 seconds in part 1 is ideal. So part 3, you should be aiming for maybe slightly longer than that, maybe 35 seconds, something in that region. Just answer the question fully as you can, as fully as you can. And be prepared for the examiner to ask you questions based on the answers that you give. So, which part of the speaking test affects my score the most? Now, as I mentioned before, each of the criteria are weighted exactly the same, so 25% each. So there's no part that really is more important than the others. Does getting interrupted by the examiner affect my score? In general, no, certainly not directly, because it's not something that you can control. But if the examiner interrupts you because you're going off topic, then that's generally a sign that you're not doing so great with fluency. Okay, so I heard that many examiners don't like the pronoun you. Is that right? I'm not so sure about that. I guess in part 3, I mean, you could use the pronoun you to talk about people generally. and it's usually clear from the context what is meant by that. But if you're using it to address the examiner directly, that would be probably inappropriate. So I think that's what you mean by that. Yeah. So I guess the answer would be no, but yeah, you shouldn't really be addressing the examiner directly. So yeah, maybe that's what you meant by that. What will happen if the answers are off topic? Well, it depends which part of the test you're in. In part one, I mean, it will affect your coherence score. Now, yeah, because if you're not really answering the question, your answer is not coherent, so it will affect your coherence mark. In part three, if you're going off topic, the examiner will try to get you back on topic again. But in general, I'd say it would affect your fluency and coherence mark. How can I practice more with native speakers? Well, when I first got to Vietnam about 10 years ago, when I went to places like public parks, people would walk up to me and just start asking me questions just because they wanted to practice English. So I guess that's something you could do. Yeah, I'm not sure what else you could do. Yeah, just try and make friends in major cities. There are native speakers everywhere, so you could try that. How can I improve my listening skill? Well, it's a thing that comes with practice, I would say. Just keep listening to podcasts, things like that. I think Voice of America have like a news bulletin that they do where it's delivered in simplified language. That could help you to improve your listening skills. Yeah, try to engage with people who speak English, and that will help you as well. Yeah, it's practice, really. It takes time. Just think of it like training. It's something that you do every day. The improvements will be slow and gradual, but with time, you will get better at these things. In the IELTS speaking test, should I use simple daily words instead of high-level vocabulary? No, you should not. That's not a good idea, because if you use simple language, you are basically putting a cap on your score. So that's a very common mistake people make. It's called playing it safe. So people think that if they use simple language, but they use it accurately, they will get a good score. That is not true. You will always be rewarded for being more ambitious with your language. So use as many complex structures as you can. Don't worry too much initially about making mistakes. Those are things that can be fixed with time, but always try to be as ambitious as you can. And that goes for not just the speaking exam, but the writing exam as well. Okay. Sorry, I've just lost that question. If I say something wrong and say it again, will points be deducted? Well, yes, I think is the short answer to that. Because if you say something wrong and repeat that error, it's evidence that the error is call it systematic. It's something that's a fault with the language. It's not just a one-off mistake. Yeah, so it will affect your score, but it depends in which category. So of course, if it's a grammar mistake, that will affect your grammar score. If it's a vocabulary error, then it will affect your lexical resource score, of course. Is it true that part 2 will decide the highest proportion, I think you meant, of your speaking score? Not really. All parts of the test are considered. well, as long as your answers are not rehearsed, of course. Any rehearsed answers are not considered, but all parts of the test are used to decide your score. So, do you have any tips on sorry, where did that question go? On maintaining the optimal length for part 2 answers? I've heard you can continuously ask yourself more questions to add content. I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that, but I think one thing you could do is we refer to it as the cross technique. So if you look at the topic in part 2, there are actually 4 parts to the answer. So as soon as you are given the piece of paper, or as soon as you get the piece of paper to make notes with, draw a cross on it, and then you can use each part of the paper to answer each of the 4 parts of the question. And this will, it will organize your answer, and it will ensure that you can speak for the full 2 minutes. Now, as I said before, it says here something about going over the limit. You can't really go over the limit. If you're still speaking after 2 minutes, the examiner will stop you. And that is generally not a good, that's not a bad thing at all. It's generally a good thing, in fact, because it shows that you've produced language for the full 2 minutes. So, what if I don't have any experience or information about the topic? Well, that can be a tricky thing to deal with. But try to invent something. Like I said, it doesn't have to be your real opinion. This is a situation when it is very good for you. It is very beneficial for you to get good at lying, and why you need to make notes as well. I assume you're talking about part 2. So, when they ask you about past events in the past tense. Sorry, it's quite. Let me try and read that question again. It happens frequently, so can I change my answer to the present tense? That's, well, I mean, it depends how you structure your answer. I mean, you can compare, I suppose, the past with the present, and that will allow you to demonstrate a wider range of tenses, to show off a wider range of tenses. But yeah, try not to speak entirely in the present tense, because that is not demonstrating the knowledge of your tenses. Okay. Does self-correction lower my scores? In some cases, yes, and in other cases, it could probably actually improve your score. So, for example, if you are using lots of complex structures, but you make a grammar mistake, but then you very quickly correct that grammar mistake, then it will not be counted as a mistake with your grammar. However, if you are constantly self-correcting, and it's slowing your speech down, then that could affect your scores, particularly in fluency. So, some videos claim that you don't have to answer all the suggested questions in part 2. I think you mean all parts of the topic. I mean, I guess that's kind of true, because, I mean, if you can get through the full 2 minutes without answering all parts of the question, perhaps because you don't get to it, then that would not affect your mark. But if you don't answer one of the parts of the topic, and your answer is not long enough, then of course that would affect your score. Does time management affect, I'm not sure what you mean by that, affect any categories in the speaking score? Well, time management is not something that you need to worry too much about. That's more what the examiners have to do. Yeah, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. So what criteria determines speaking band 9? So coherence, fluency, or vocabulary. It's all parts. Does intonation and accent play a vital role in the speaking score? Well, certainly intonation does. Accent, as I mentioned before, accent doesn't really affect it a great deal. As long as it's still clear what you're saying, and it's not difficult to understand, then your accent will not affect your score a great deal. Yeah, so don't worry. Like I said, don't worry too much about whether you speak in a British or an American accent. It's more important that your speech is clear and that you use a wide range of pronunciation features, including rhythm and intonation. Does changing the order of questions in part 2 lower my score? It doesn't, actually. But the points in the topic are arranged in a logical order. And if you could produce a coherent answer and change the order of them, the topics, the points in the topic, then yeah, I don't see why that would lower your score. It would not affect it, I don't think. But yeah, I generally would try to stick to the order of the points in the topic, just because it's one less thing for you to think about. So I heard that there are some words that the examiners would like to hear. Well, I mean, to a point, yes, I guess that's correct. But I think what the examiners like to hear is just a range of different structures, different grammar structures, and a range of vocabulary used flexibly and accurately, and good pronunciation as well. So, like I said before, rhythm and intonation, connected speech. Try to cut down on those consonant sounds errors with them, and final consonant sounds. If I don't understand what the examiner is asking, how can I answer? Well, it depends on the part of the test. As I mentioned in part 1, you can, if there's a particular word you don't understand, you can ask for a definition of that word. If you don't understand the question at all, you can ask them to repeat it. But that's the only thing you can do in that case. You can either ask for a definition of a word or ask them to repeat the question. In part 3, or in part 2, you can ask for clarification on any of the vocabulary. In part 3, you can ask the examiner to rephrase the question, and they will do that. They will try to make it easier for you to understand. But I guess if you're going to the IELTS test and you're struggling to understand the part 1 questions, that's generally an indicator that maybe you've entered the test a bit too soon, and you should probably do some more practice before you go and do the test. What if I'm interrupted by the examiner in part 2 while I'm talking? Well, generally that will not happen unless you have been speaking for 2 minutes. that's the only time that you would be interrupted by the examiner, and that's not a problem. Will the examiner allow me to see the time I speak in part 2, or do I have to estimate it in my head? That's a good question. Now, it really depends. Of course, you're not allowed to take a watch in with you or your phone. There is a timer, but that's not for you. That's for the examiner. Often there is a clock on the wall as well, so you could, if you think you can use the clock as a guide. But yeah, generally you need to kind of get used to doing it in your head. As I say, the examiner stops you when you've been speaking for long enough. Can the examiners recognize prepared answers if the test takers still answer the questions naturally with good intonation? Well, a telltale sign that the questions are rehearsed is that they don't sound natural. That's a clear sign that they are rehearsed. So if the examiner asks again, but I still don't understand the question, what should I do? I think it depends on which part you're in, because of course in part 1, the examiner can only repeat the question once, and then they have to move on. So I would say try to give it an answer in part 1. Give an answer to the question. In part 3, you can ask the examiner to rephrase the question, and they will break it down. They'll make it easier for you. If that happens too many times, then they will simply move on to the next question. What are the differences between Band 8 and Band 9? Well, Band 8 is a very good score to get in IELTS. In all parts of the IELTS test, it's a very high standard, but there are certain things that you hear in Band 8, like occasional mistakes, but they're the kind of mistakes that a native English speaker would not make. Band 9 generally is those mistakes are not there. So if you hear someone who's Band 9, that's basically the same as a native speaker in terms of the language that they produce. Okay, does it affect my score if I ask them to make the question easier to understand, or if I do not understand the question? Well, it doesn't affect your score directly, but if you're doing that, generally that means you're struggling with the language, which that will of course result in you getting a lower score, but it doesn't affect it directly. Okay. Can I use do justice with or put on, I think you mean put on a thinking cap, in all parts of the IELTS speaking test? Are these idiomatic expressions? Well, they are idiomatic expressions, yes. And as we mentioned before, idioms are fine. They're good to use, but don't overdo it. Don't try to put one in every sentence, because after a while it starts to sound really strange, especially if they're not used accurately. So like I said before, try to use them naturally. Okay. Can I make some jokes when answering in speaking? I would say that's probably not wise. It's not situationally appropriate. I mean, if you think of something funny to say, then yeah, why not? But yeah, it's not really a time for making jokes. Okay, are there any more questions? If I do not use any synonyms throughout the speaking test, but just speak fluently with normal vocabulary, could I achieve band 8? Now, that's quite a difficult question to answer. I think I would say probably not, because if you're not using synonyms, I think that by that you mean you're not paraphrasing the questions or paraphrasing yourself. So that's not really demonstrating a range of vocabulary. Yeah, so yeah, try to paraphrase as much as you can. Okay. I think we've got time for one or two more. What is better to do? What is better to do when answering a part 3 question? One idea with details, or two ideas but with fewer explanations and examples? I'm not really sure that it really makes much difference. The thing that examiners are looking for is a wide range of language. Now, I suppose if you give an idea and then give explanations and examples and further details for those ideas, as long as the topic develops logically and coherently, then that will lead to a higher score. I think that's probably the more important thing to focus on, how your topics develop rather than the ideas that you have. Okay. Can you give the structure of the talk in part 2? Some teachers told me to talk about something related to the past first, then the present, and then finally the future. Well, that's not really how it works. It's well, if you look at the topic card, you can see, what you're expected to talk about. There are 4 parts to it. You should really focus on answering those parts of the questions, but within that, that framework, within that topic, then you should try to include as much language as you can. So yeah, it's good to refer to the past and then compare it with the present, and then also talk about the future, but only do that if it's really answering the question. You shouldn't try to kind of force it. Just really focus on the topics in the question, or the points in the topic card. Is it time for another one?
Okay, so maybe just the last one. I'm trying to get band 9 speaking. Can you say something to motivate me? I think you can say something to motivate all the candidates that are joining with us today.
That's a good one. Well, if you're going for band 9, that suggests that you're already at quite a high score. So I would say really focus on like the little errors that you make. Pay real close attention to detail. So cutting down on the grammar errors, collocations as well. Make sure they're accurate. Yeah, it's really the difference between, like I talked about before, the difference between band 8 and band 9 is the lack of errors. Yeah, so if you can just focus on those, it takes time. It's not an easy thing to fix. It can be quite difficult, especially if you're not in a country where the first language is English. But yeah, that's what you really need to focus on. Just those little errors that people make. That's the difference between band 8 and band 9. So try to cut down on the errors in vocabulary and grammar, and also pronunciation, of course. And if all those things happen, then the fluency of your answers will naturally follow. And as I talked about before with topic development, that is an indicator of, you know, really high levels of fluency. So try to cut down on your hesitation as much as possible. Make sure it's all content related hesitation. So pause before you answer. And that's what will get you from band 8 to band 9. Okay, I think that concludes the talk.
All right, thank you very much for all the useful information that you've given today. Cảm ơn các bạn đã tham gia cùng với lại IELTS IDP trong buổi sáng ngày hôm nay. Mong là các bạn đã có được thật là nhiều những cái tips bổ ích cho cái kỳ thi sắp tới của mình và sẽ cùng nhau cải thiện cái kỹ năng speaking. Rất mong là các bạn sẽ có những cái kết quả thật tốt trong kỳ thi sắp tới. Mình sẽ thoải mái, tự tin và đạt điểm cao ha các bạn. Cảm ơn các bạn.